Okay, we'll start with this. Jake Paul, who sees himself as a sort of rival to Dana White, TKO, Turkey LL Sheik, UFC, etc., Jake Paul reacted to the news that not only will the UFC move over from ESPN to Paramount Plus, but they are moving away from the pay-per-view model. He posted a couple of quotes from Mark Shapiro, TKO Group's president and chief operating officer, that read, "The pay-per-view model is a thing of the past. What's on pay-per-view anymore? Boxing? Movies on DirecTV? It's an outdated, antiquated model. So, it was paramount to us, forgive the pun, where it's one-stop shopping, especially for our younger fans in flyover states. When they find out, wait, if I just sign up to Paramount for $12.99 a month, I'm gonna get to see all this?" To that, Jake Paul stated, "The hubris from these guys is unreal if you're their partner. First they talk about getting into boxing with no risk and charging fees on fees on fees on fees from their partners who are putting up the money. Now they are saying pay-per-view is dead when they have a pay-per-view this weekend with Duplessis and another one with Pereira and another one with Aspinall and another one with..." I mean, I see what Jake Paul is saying, that they're saying that pay-per-view is dead at a time where they are still selling pay-per-views, but they're just finishing out what they're finishing out. Once the deal begins next year, pay-per-view, at least for them, is a thing of the past. Scratch that. Because I don't actually believe that this is the end of pay-per-view for the UFC, that they're never going to do one again, and that boxing won't continue to use the model here and there, but they are scaling down those efforts. Look, there are always going to be some fights that are worth more than others. Some fights so big, so unique, and so surreal that you can actually use the pay-per-view model with some success. The issue has been, it's overused. It's being abused. It has been. As a tool to satisfy the financial demands of the fighters, justified or otherwise, it's been used too much, too many times by too many fighters for too many fights that created an oversaturated market where nobody's buying nothing anymore because you're making this stuff too difficult to get to. The other angle of this is you can't develop the next generation of fighters behind a paywall. Nobody's gonna know who they are. That's what you do on a regular schedule of fights throughout the calendar year. Develop the fighters, develop their marquee value. Because that's a part of it too. The grassroots demand that develops over time for a fighter, for a fight, it doesn't happen behind a paywall. It happens as part of a regular schedule, as the audience sees the fighter grow and get better, fight by fight, the fighter, the fighters, and before you know it, you have a whale of a fight, a super fight. There will always be a place in combat sports for the pay-per-view model, but it shouldn't be abused and overused. And that's the problem. So scaling down, because fighter A and fighter B think that they're worth X, we shouldn't end up having to pay extra to satisfy their inflated demands. But that's been the logic for years now. That's why we've seen so many pay-per-views, and that has to stop. So a lot of these fighters, they're gonna have to get real or sit on the shelf. But you let the fighters tell the story, it's always supposed to work out to where they get more money, whether they're good for that money or not. They're always supposed to get more, and that's what has to stop. But wouldn't you say that Turkey LL Sheik regularly overpaying these fighters in excess of their market value contributes to that problem? To the layman it might. the guy who can't think 5 or 10 steps ahead. I mean, for starters, Turkey LL Sheik himself said that he's going to be doing away with pay-per-view for his shows, but not only that, these fighters that he overpays, these fighters that he does use in his shows, he don't use them for no pity-pat fights.
Process of elimination.
Oh yes, Turkey will pay you, and he'll pay you well, but not for no tune-up. He's going to put you in with a real one. He's going to put you in a real fight, and if you want to keep getting paid like that, you better win.
Or at minimum, you better perform. You better give a good account of yourself. You have to justify what you cost. And if you can't...
Process of elimination. Call it a filtration process. For Devin Haney to get invited back to one of Turkey's shows, he couldn't fight just anybody. He's got to fight Brian Norman after the stinker that he put on.
We'll bring you back. But you got to fight this guy now.
Now over to Jake Paul, who seems to have had an adverse reaction to Mark Shapiro's statement that pay-per-view is dead and it's an antiquated model. What else might have rubbed Jake the wrong way is he's still trying to sell pay-per-views too. Or did you forget that the Chavez fight he just had, that was a pay-per-view, and his next fight might be too, so he's not going to like the sound of that.
That everybody in combat sports is now moving away from the pay-per-view model at a time where he's still trying to sell pay-per-views.
You're getting Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford and 3 days of boxing consecutively at no additional charge on Netflix. Then in November,
Benavidez versus Yard, no pay-per-view.
Then next year, when the UFC Paramount Plus deal starts, they're not going to be doing pay-per-views either. So when you talk about pressure to move away from pay-per-view, I think that Jake is now feeling that pressure. Not just the PBC, but him too.
The Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul fight, that one wasn't a pay-per-view. But the vast majority of Jake's other forays into the sport of boxing were, whether it was on Triller, Showtime, DAZN.
Pay-per-views across 3 separate platforms, and I get the sense that his very next foray into the sport will also be a pay-per-view.
So he's not going to like the sound of any of this.
Man, you know I get asked on a day-to-day basis, do you miss boxing? And if you came back, who would you fight? Most days I don't miss it. I'm very content doing what I'm doing in life right now. Who would you fight? That's the problem. You know, it's a lot of names out there, but it's not a lot of names that make sense. You know, but it's one name that I've brought up before that when you say that name, I can see myself fighting him. Present day, today. If the business was right and if, you know, everything was right on that front, me and Anthony Joshua. That's a fight that I would take at Wembley Stadium. It's a dangerous fight for my legacy. It's a dangerous fight across the board. And but that's a fight that would get me in the gym and get me in the mindset that I need to be in to go to war. It's Anthony Joshua. And I know you're getting ready to, you know, fight Jake Paul. It looks like that's where it's going. I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about a real fight.
Andre Ward sees all this talk of a potential Anthony Joshua versus Jake Paul fight, and he tells himself, well, if Jake can have the cojones to get in there with a guy like Anthony, then so can I. I am many times over the boxer that Jake Paul tries to be. I'm an Olympic gold medalist, I'm a 2-weight unified world champion, lineal in both.
Remember that this is a fight that he talked about years ago. Didn't talk about it much in recent years, but he's decided to revisit it, and I don't think it's a coincidence
that he's doing it at a time where Joshua versus Jake is a bit of a hot-button topic. It's an idea that's being bounced around. Andre Ward, in his fashion, wants to interject himself in the conversation.
Inject himself in the conversation. And you'll notice that when he talks about a comeback, he doesn't talk about coming back to fight the undisputed light heavyweight champion, Dmitry Bivol.
No.
He doesn't talk about fighting the undisputed heavyweight champion, Alexander Usyk.
Talks about coming back against Anthony Joshua, because underneath it all, he views Anthony as a glass Joe, as this era's John Ruiz. What John Ruiz was to Roy Jones Jr., he wants Anthony to be for him.
Except that he's no Roy Jones Jr., and Anthony is far from a John Ruiz. He's a 2-time unified heavyweight champion and an Olympic gold medalist like yourself. But in typical American fashion, Ward underestimates the Brit and overestimates himself. Don't forget that this is a guy who's been knocked down by a journeyman in Darnell Boone and knocked down by a jab, a simple jab, from Sergey Kovalev at light heavyweight. So what do you think if those heavyweight punches, what do you think happens if those heavyweight punches from Anthony Joshua land on Ward?
He's 41 years old now, and it's for that reason that I don't even know how seriously I can take all of this comeback talk. But what I remember of Andre Ward, he wasn't really that big a guy at super middle, moderately sized.
Moderately sized as a light heavyweight as well. Not that beefy a guy, not that big a puncher either. At his very best, Ward was an inside fighter, inside slickster.
Was an inside guy, and that worked for him, at super middle and light heavy. But the idea that you're going to dominate the pocket against a full-grown heavyweight, a full-blown heavyweight...
No.
Anthony doesn't even have to land clean to hurt this guy. He can punch him on the shoulder. He can punch him on the elbow and hurt him. So the idea that at 41 years old, Andre Ward is all of a sudden going to come off the couch, come out of retirement to fight Anthony, who's still an active boxer, by the way, and I sincerely doubt that Andre would take any tune-ups in between, any tune-ups with full-blown heavyweights, as that would yield the same peril, the same danger as the Joshua fight, that in trying to get ready for him, you might not make it there.
So you'd want to go in cold.
Risk it all. Not dissimilar from what Terence Crawford is doing. I feel like Andre Ward is a closeted glory hog.
I don't think he ever liked that Canelo Alvarez became the first undisputed champion in the four-belt era. The first guy to hold all the belts where he did his best work. Canelo's legacy at that weight overshadows his.
His legacy at light heavyweight is overshadowed by both Dimitri and Artur jointly, since they would be the last undisputed champions that division has ever seen, rendering Andre Ward but an afterthought, a unified champion among several unified champions that division has seen, but how many were undisputed?
I think he's a glory hog, but I think he's in the closet about it. He wants to appear calm and cool and collected, reserved.
But he is resentful that in spite of his amateur and professional accolades, he was never that big a draw. He was always in somebody's shadow. So now a part of him wishes to add more to his legacy when you see that Terence is jumping up 2 weight classes to fight Canelo and how he might be remembered if he wins.
Dimitri and Artur became undisputed. Usyk did it 3 times.
Inoue and Terence did it too. Terence is going for 3.
He's got itchy knuckles, but he's very careful.
At least he thinks he's being careful. The caption above the video that he posted reads, "All the smoke," except he doesn't want all the smoke. He wants Anthony specifically, and it's not because he thinks he's good. It's not because he respects him. It's because he thinks Anthony is this era's John Ruiz, except that he's not. And Ward would get a lot more than he bargained for if he actually tried to fight him.
He looks at Anthony the way that Gervonta Davis looked at Ryan Garcia. This guy's beatable, and he's worth a lot of money.
Do I expect Andre Ward to do it, though? Take the plunge? Not really, because he's mentioned this in years past, and if he were going to do it, he would have did it then. At 41 years old, time is up.
Too much time has passed.
You try to fight this guy now, he's going to leave you sprawled across the ring, stretched like some Sunday slacks. It's not a hot take to say that Anthony is just too big for Andre Ward. Too strong. He doesn't have to hit you clean to hurt you. He can punch you on the arms.
Andre Ward was never a knockout merchant, so I don't think he's now carrying up enough power to the heavyweight division to put a dent in a full-blown heavyweight. No, Anthony stops him.
And that is not a hot take.
It's a bit like, do you remember when, I think it was Floyd when he boxed McGregor, he was like, I'm robbing a bank, I think he come out in the ski mask, etc. If they're going to pay him ridiculous money to do that, then, it's going to spike a bit of interest. Like, do I think it will happen? Probably not. In terms of a fight, like, Francis Ngannou is one of the most durable men on the planet. And look at what happened there. I don't think it's good for boxing, if I'm honest.
Back over to Jake Paul and his current predicament, in case you don't realize that he's in one. At a time where the entire combat sports world is moving away from the pay-per-view model, Jake Paul and his niche are under threat. The sales pitch for Jake's fights has always been, maybe this will be the guy that stops him, maybe this will be the guy that knocks him out and runs him out of combat sports. That's a big part of the marketing angle, and that's why now they're threatening to sue anyone that suggests the fights are fixed, the fights are rigged.
Now, we're not talking about just any Joe Blow with a YouTube channel and something on his mind, an opinion they want to express, but well-known figures like Piers Morgan.
If anyone with a sizable following in the public eye makes the suggestion that Jake Paul is fixing these fights and they're not fights, they're rigged, they may be subject to a defamation suit because it's getting harder for Jake to sell his events. I don't know what the Chavez numbers were, but I don't imagine they were very good, because if they were, we would have heard about him. I don't know what that did at the box office.
I think that Jake peaked with the Tyson exhibition because it doesn't really get bigger than Mike Tyson. That is a very hard act to follow. Mike is not just a guy that used to box and used to hold a belt. He is a cultural icon, and that they did that event the way that they did, making it available to all existing Netflix subscribers, they outdid themselves, and that is an extraordinarily hard act to follow. So I imagine that the Chavez fight,
it did not suffice, and it was a far cry from whatever they made with Mike Tyson. So Jake is in a pickle now. He's in a predicament. I don't mind him and what he's been doing.
As a promoter, I think he's great for the sport of boxing. I'm actually looking forward to MVP's 2 cards at the end of this month. So as a promoter, I do like Jake. But as a fighter, he's in a predicament.
Because if he really is a fighter, a bona fide fighter, a boxer, then climbing up those ranks until you can fight for an alphabet title should be easy enough to do. That's what fighters have to do if you are a fighter, whereas Jake...
I don't want to bash him, but he's more of a novelty act, and he's one that insists on boxing on pay-per-view. Most of Jake's forays into the sport of boxing have been on pay-per-view, and now combat sports are moving away from that.
So to sell him, you need something big. Something bigger than usual, bigger than ordinary.
Anthony Joshua.
No, I don't think he'll do the same metrics with Anthony Joshua that he did with Mike Tyson. There are few athletes on the planet as recognizable as Mike Tyson. But Anthony Joshua does make for a big event. It does make for a big fight if Jake Paul actually intends to go through with it.
I've questioned whether or not he does because he's facing certain defeat. More than certain defeat, he could get really hurt.
What is he, 12-1? 13-1? How many actual boxers did he fight in those 13 fights, though? Because he'd be facing an Olympic gold medalist and a 2-time unified heavyweight champion, where he is but a novice cruiserweight that hasn't even fought very many, if any, real cruiserweights.
So what is he, desperate? That he's pushing for this Anthony Joshua fight. If he actually intends to have it, that would have to be an act of desperation.
If he actually intends to have it, but I'm still not sure that he does. I do feel like he's running out of options. You can't just pull up any old retired MMA fighter anymore and sell a couple of pay-per-views, because selling pay-per-views is becoming increasingly difficult.
Frankly, you're running out of retired MMA fighters that are worth anything, that can sell anything.
So he's in a pickle, all right. He's in a pickle here, and I don't know what the plan B is, what the contingency is for Jake Paul, who's already had a Canelo Alvarez fight fall through, and if the Anthony Joshua fight falls through, what is the alternative? This guy says he wants to become a champion in the sport of boxing.
Tommy Fury rematch. He can always do a Tommy Fury rematch. That's not going to get him a belt.
A real belt, but he can always do that.